Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today I'm going to be talking about my prospect and my top choice for the 2024 NFL Draft for your Jacksonville Jaguars, and that is none other, as y'all probably know by now, to be honest, than wide receiver Malik Nabers out of LSU. So we're going to talk about him. I'm going to give you my scouting profile on him. I've already mentioned it on the wide receiver rankings, but we will walk back through it. We're going to talk about some of his production, watch some film, and then we're going to finish this off talking about maybe what trade packages the Jaguars have to do. There's specifically two teams we're going to talk about, and it'll be three trades we'll discuss. I'll have a kind of a crazy one thrown in that I think would honestly probably be the best of the three, but we'll talk about that at the end. Full disclosure, this is my second time recording this. Unfortunately, I just finished the 30-minute recap of this where I did not have my mic on the whole time. So I'm recording it again, so maybe you'll get some better thoughts because of that. But yeah, that's where I'm at right now, but we are going to get this done for you guys. So let's go ahead. Let's jump into it. We are going to look at some of his production from this last year, talk about maybe how he stacks up against some of the other receivers. First thing I'm going to talk about is a snap count, because I think there's a lot of interesting conversation here, because there's a lot of people, even some big names, that are saying that Malik Nabers is a slot wide receiver, and that is where he should be in the NFL. I think he could be, but I don't think that's necessarily got to be the case. I think Malik Nabers absolutely has the size to play outside as well. You can look at this last year. It's basically 50-50 where he's playing over the course of the season. Did play a little more in the slot towards the end in certain games, but it just shows that he is a versatile player that can produce everywhere. Now, some will argue, and they'll say, well, Malik Nabers had more production in the slot than he did outside, and I believe that is the case. However, when we're looking at wide receivers, and we'll just take a simple formula here where, you take the receiving yards that they have inside the slot, divide by the amount of snaps they're there, versus out wide. For almost every single receiver, you're going to have more in the slot. That is just a universal truth with almost every prospect. So you can always make that argument, but you got one slot position. You're not playing with three slot receivers and no one out wide. It just doesn't work. So Malik Nabers, yeah, he's going to be more productive there, but you can go watch the film and he's just as productive outside as well. He's a great player there too. So I think he's someone who could do it all. He could be a Y. He could be a Z. I think he could even play a little bit of X, honestly. But that's kind of how I look at him. So going to the actual stats here. We're just going to lead with this. Malik Nabers, if you couldn't tell based off this number, he was the most productive wide receiver in all of college football this last year. At least the Power 5 schools, I'm pretty sure. But he was putting up 100 yards a game basically every week. His worst performances from this last year, other than the bowl game where I don't even think he played the whole time. I think he was going for like a record or something. But he ended up having his worst performances be 67 yards, 87 yards, and 89. And then we're talking all 100. So I'm just going to be honest. I don't think that's that bad of a day. Like, he was super productive all year long. He was a great wide receiver for LSU through thick and thin. And so I think that says a lot right off the bat about him being able to carry the load as a wide receiver one at the next level. The way he got these yards was what's, of course, also very impressive, because the film says a lot about how good of a player this is in Malik Nabers. Going through his scouting profile a little bit again, he is one of the best separators in this class. You might give the crown to Ladd McConkey because, well, Ladd McConkey is just stupid good at it. But Malik Nabers is very good in his own right, and arguably better, if you want to say that. He's got blazing fast speed at a 4.35. I think he could run even faster. I think this 10-yard split as well could end up being even faster. But he has one of the best start and stop abilities in this entire class. He is deceptive. It might not be a word, actually. He has a lot of deception to his routes. We'll say that. He is a master deceiver with the way he plays. He gets himself open. He tricks defenders. He provides ample separation for whatever quarterback he's working with. He's got great, soft, reliable hands. He's consistently improved each year. He's averaged throughout half this season, it was like 125 yards a game at one point. Just ridiculous production. In that short area burst he has, and we'll start showing some film here, helps him break out of tackles really well. Because when you move that fast, I mean, people are already lunging at you and their trajectory is just completely thrown off because you're already out of the gap. Like, you're just exploding out. You're going down the field. That's the kind of guy that Malik Nabers is. He's a freak athlete. His change of direction skills are incredible as well. Kind of goes without saying with some of the things we've already mentioned. But these are really good things about him as a player. The other thing that I think is phenomenal about his profile, and kind of a counter argument to the character concerns, is that he's 20 years old right now. 20 years old. He will turn 21 at the start of the year. So this is a young guy. This is someone who has still in that time played a lot of football, but he has got a very, very long career ahead of him. And I think it also says a lot about how you've seen his maturity grow over this last year. He's clearly a younger guy. I mean, around this age, like compared to other prospects who of course are close, like everyone's around their low 20s, he is still years younger than a lot of these guys. So there's more maturing that's going to take place. And as far as like the issues that he's had, I know the big one is, carrying a gun without a license in New Orleans. That was a major issue. I do think that he's a player who has matured. I don't think those things are going to be massive issues. And I think it kind of depends on the environment that he goes to at the NFL level. Because let's talk about, what happens if, I don't want to throw out an exact team, but let's just say he goes to a bad environment. Let's say he goes to an environment with players who aren't really that disciplined, players who get in trouble off the field quite a bit. He might have issues there. That's possible. I'm not saying he's some terrible person, but you could absolutely see a young guy getting around a bad group and having those problems. We're looking at Jacksonville, though. I just don't see that happening. I don't see guys like Christian Kirk and Trevor Lawrence and Evan Ingram being people who are going to be a bad influence on him. I think it'll be the exact opposite. I think you'd like what Malik Nabers would turn into in Jacksonville as far as a person. As far as like how he's conducted himself this last year, I think his interviews have been fine, honestly. I mean, I think he's a young guy who's, obviously still got maturing, but I do think that he's focused on football. I think that's going to be his priority, and I'm not that concerned about it, honestly. And I'd almost see it as a benefit that these concerns are there, because maybe it lets him fall down the board. That's what you really hope happens on draft day. And, as people who aren't inside these organizations, don't have access to all this information, we don't know where he's going to really go for sure. We don't have 100% of an idea on that. But we do know that there are some concerns, and maybe that'll change where he goes, and we just got to root for him to fall down the board, ideally. That's the best case scenario. But there's just a lot to work with Malik Nabers. He's a phenomenal player already. He's an extremely young one as well. Tons of physical and athletic tools that he's got to work with. When I watched him, like first time I turned on film, and with receivers, like what I usually do, I'll turn on highlights. I'll kind of get an idea for like, where does this guy win, right? And you got to watch the normal film as well, of course. That's why we're playing it right now. But the moment I watched Malik Nabers, my first thought was like, oh my gosh, this is like watching Justin Jefferson again when he was coming out from LSU. Like, that's who he reminded me of a lot. You could also say he reminds you of Jamar Chase in some ways. But this guy is a really nice, healthy combination of both of those players in how he wins the game. I think that the next level, Malik Nabers will have that style of impact for the team he goes to. Like, I'm just saying now, if Jacksonville picks Malik Nabers, I think they'll be a deep playoff team. Given they don't have major injuries or terrible things that derail them, I think they'll have that kind of team. I think the offense would be absolutely complete, and not only that, but extremely explosive. I think you'd have a strong defensive line, and I think your secondary is probably your main spot of weakness, specifically because you've got Ronald Darby starting, who could get hurt, but I do think you can still resolve that in this draft. I think there's other ways to take care of that issue. So if they get Malik Nabers, like, I think the ceiling all of a sudden just go sky high. You think of the impact that Jamar Chase had in Cincinnati. They went from being a very bad football team to on the brink of winning the Super Bowl. And keep in mind, Jamar Chase was open down the field for the game-winning play. But obviously, Cincinnati has offensive line issues, and that kind of stopped them. I don't think we have those same issues right now because we do have enough starters. We don't have guys out there that are terrible. We've at least replaced them. Just more so like when we talk about the offensive line, I want the run blocking to improve. I want them to get younger. I want them to make investments. But I do think that they're good enough to avoid some of those issues. So, like, my opinion on the impact of this, I think he could have as big of an impact as you can imagine. I think he's the kind of player that you want to add to this team to also unlock Trevor Lawrence. Think if you, extend him before this year, and then he gets a player like Malik Nabers on the field, that extension's going to look pretty damn good. So, just some thoughts there, right? I could talk all day about Malik Nabers. I'm not going to do that necessarily to you guys. I do want to talk more so, since we've talked about, his scouting profile before and all that. Like, where do I think he's going to go, realistically, if Jacksonville doesn't make a move? Where do you got to trade? And what's going to be the cost at the end of the day? So let's take a look at that. So I've got two teams that we're going to be looking at. One, and this is where we'll start, is the New York Giants. The other one is the Atlanta Falcons at number 8. The final trade I'll talk about involves both teams, and this is a 3-way trade. I don't think it would ever happen, but I do think there's some logic to it, and I just want to throw out the idea maybe as kind of a creative thought. But the first one we'll talk about, trading with the New York Giants. Now, I'm going to give you my rundown on what I think happens before this point. And I feel like I have a good idea. Of course, with how the NFL draft goes, one thing goes different and everything else crumbles. That's usually how it goes. But what I think we know is that these are going to be quarterbacks, first 3 picks, for sure. I think 4 is Marvin Harrison Jr. I just don't see Arizona actually trading out of that pick. I think number 5, based off everything we've heard, right now, if there's no swap between Atlanta and Minnesota over the tampering, I think they move back to 11 with the Vikings. They pick up 23. They pick up maybe some other picks. They're going for maybe a stronger offensive lineman like J.C. Latham. So they're okay passing on Joe Alt. So I think it goes probably Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Marvin Harrison Jr., J.J. McCarthy. It's 4 quarterbacks. It's Marvin Harrison Jr. You get to number 6 with the Giants. And so I think the big question here is going to ultimately be, are the Giants picking Malik Nabers? Are they looking at someone else? And would they move out of this pick? From what we've heard, and I think as well, like just kind of logic looking at the receiving core, I think the Giants are looking at not Malik Nabers, they're looking at Rome Odunze. Because you look at that receiving core, there's a lot of smaller guys, a lot of slot receivers that are being forced to play elsewhere. I know that Malik Nabers can play outside. I've made that very clear. But as far as adding a different kind of receiver, someone who can be more of a complementary piece, I think Rome Odunze does that. I also think the way that he's interviewed with teams, because he's done a phenomenal job, he's one of my favorite players. Like, it may sound like hate talking so much about Nabers, but Odunze's phenomenal too. Like, I can't have that lost in this, but I do have Nabers above him. And that's why we're talking about him here. But I do think that with how well Odunze is interviewed with the Giants from everything we've heard, I think it's more likely that they're targeting him than they're targeting Malik Nabers. So if they're not set on that, if they're looking maybe in this scenario, think if you're New York, right? You've got Daniel Jones 1 more year. After that, you can cut him, and you're probably getting a quarterback next year. If you want to be in a position to, if you have to, move up for a quarterback, and if you don't, well, surround him with as much talent as you can, you want more picks on your team. And so why not move back with a team like Jacksonville that can make a huge move? Although, of course, like, I don't think they move up to 6. I think 8 is probably the earliest. But why not make a move theoretically here with Jacksonville and get a plethora of picks to let them go get Malik Nabers. So I think like what that trade would look like, kind of trying to find a balance between like maybe the Jalen Waddle trade, maybe even considering a little bit of like the move from 12 to 6 for the Cardinals last year. Things like that. I think you could end up with maybe 17 for 6, throw in 48, throw in 114, future second, and even Roy Robertson Harris. I think this is the player that could get involved in a trade with the Giants if it were to happen, because they need interior defensive line help. Probably don't want to spend a ton of money. And, well, we don't save any money trading Roy Robertson Harris. It's actually pointless for us. It's part of the trade, obviously, to help the Giants. They would only pay, I think, like $2 million against the cap this year for him. And then it's like $6 million in 25, $6 million in 26. And that's it. And so, like, talking about the value of that contract, that's great for New York. Like, that's affordable because Jacksonville's paying for a hefty amount of it. So that, I think, is an option potentially for this trade, to throw in a player and try to kind of sweeten the deal, and then get someone who I don't think is going to have a ton of snaps this year as well. You got Tyler Lacey too. You got Adam Gotsis as your backups. You got your starters, of course, in Eric Armstead and Devon Hamilton. You know, you might even pick a guy in this class. So the role for Roy Robertson Harris is not there as much. So I think he's a player who can make sense. But I do think this is an expensive trade to get done. Obviously, you know, with 5 assets moving over. Now, why are we talking about 6? I talk about 6 because I think this might be the last pick you can move up to get Malik Nabers. I don't know that for a fact, though. What it comes down to is how the how the Titans view Joe Alt and Malik Nabers versus each other. Because what we know is that the Titans want a slot receiver. They still have room to add that. They're very expensive everywhere, so adding through the draft is the ideal scenario. Don't get that twisted. They also really need a left tackle. You can absolutely go argue that they need the tackle more than the receiver, but you can also argue that the wide receiver might be worth more. Now, what we know from Tennessee and what they've told us is that if there's a wide receiver and a tackle on the board that have the same grade, they're going to go with the wide receiver because the wide receiver scores points. That's the way they worded it. And they could go get a tackle in the second round too. There's other picks for them to address that need. It's not like they do one round of the draft and then they're done. Now, of course, they got to fill the need properly, right? Like, they don't want to get Will Levis hurt again, and that's the risk here. But to get like a decade plus of Malik Nabers, I'll just call my shot here. I think if I'm the Titans, I would take Malik Nabers, and I think they will in that scenario. And I think those two players are the conversation there, because in this scenario, you've got the 4 quarterbacks, you got Marvin Harrison Jr., and you got Rome Odunze off the board. So the Titans might take Malik Nabers. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe there's something we don't know. But that's why we're talking about 6 with New York, because it's a logical trade. It might be the logical last place you can go to go get that potentially generational wide receiver for this team. Now, the other possibility, I think this would be the absolute last place that you could go to go get Malik Nabers, unless, you know, Atlanta's sitting at 8 and they just really, really want someone there. That's always possible, but I don't think it'll happen. Pick number 8 with Atlanta is possible too, because say the Titans like Joe Alt more, say they just have a better grade on him. That's totally possible. You also factor in character concerns could be a thing. Maybe the Titans are looking at like, okay, let's just get Joe Alt. We got our receivers. We'll be fine. And we're going to solidify this offense and have it ready to go. That might be the outcome. And then you're looking at pick 8 with the Falcons, which I think would cost significantly less. Because, you know, the start, you're looking at giving up 17 and 48. That's the base. And then as far as like who you're competing with, well, you could try to throw out a lot of teams. I don't know how many teams are moving up to number 8. Because I think the Bears are looking to move back. I think that's realistically what happens. You look at the Jets, I think they're looking for Bowers or they're looking for Fatanu. So, well, Nabers would be great for them. I don't know if they make that move. I think they would probably just take the guy who falls to them and make the pick, especially, you know, losing some of their selections this year from the Aaron Rodgers trade. You look at Like the Vikings, the Broncos, the Raiders, I don't think they're moving up at that point. I mean, maybe a team is here at 11 that wants to make the move, but otherwise, like the Saints don't have a lot of capital, and the Colts are really the only one. You could argue the Colts can make that move, but I do think that they might want an outside receiver more, like a bigger guy, although they do have that in Pittman. Maybe they see Malik Nabers as a slot only. Now, I, of course, argued that's not what he is necessarily. He can do that, right? But maybe teams don't agree with that. That's very possible. So we could have a scenario where maybe there's not teams wanting to move up to 8. The price isn't that big, but I think realistically something like this gets it done. Because Atlanta moving back to 17, they can still get one of their guys, one of the cornerbacks, one of the pass rushers, someone they have very high on their board. They get a second rounder. They end up with Jacksonville's second round pick for Calvin Ridley. Just wasn't for Calvin Ridley in this scenario. Then they get 114 as well. So that's another way this could get done. Now here's the crazy trade. And this is probably what I think would be the best scenario, assuming that he goes at 7, which I think will happen. What if you move up with the Falcons number 8? We'll make this trade happen. And then you look to move up with the Giants to 6 then. Here's my argument. If the Giants want Rome Odunze, if that's indeed true, the quarterbacks are gone. They want their future picks, right? They want to get that as well, but they really like Rome Odunze. Because they get the future picks, they have Odunze, they got a wide receiver for their quarterback in the future. They've got extra selections. That's the best case scenario. So if Jacksonville calls, if they say, hey, we got a deal where we can move up to 8, would you want to flip 8 for 6? We're going to take Nabers. The Titans will almost undoubtedly take Alt because they need a slot receiver and then tackles in need. So, you're obviously not going to have a conversation there anymore. You're just going to get your guy at pick number 8. We need to move up for Nabers in front of our division rival. Let's get a trade done. Can that happen? I absolutely think it would. I think this would be a very underrated way for Jacksonville to get up to 6 and also to do it cheaper, which I'll show you when we compare these two trades. So what would it look like? I honestly think maybe you can make this trade, giving up a future third. Could even maybe do it with a combination of these picks, but probably a future third. And we'll throw in Roy Robertson Harris again, just to sweeten the deal, just to get it done. If this is the trade, and we compare this to our other scenario, the Giants are now in their best case scenario, right? If they don't get a quarterback, they're getting Rome Odunze. They're still moving back. They're getting more picks, more ammunition for the future. They're going to get their guy, right? That's great for them. The Falcons move back to number 17. They get extra picks. They get a lot of extra picks, in fact, and they're now going to still get a massive position of value in a very good player who is inevitably going to be there at number 17. Meanwhile, Jacksonville moves up for cheaper than expected. If we compare these trades, look at the picks this year. We got 6, 96, 116, 153, 212, 236. It's the exact same here. The difference is that if you're just making the move with the Giants, which this might be more difficult for them to make the move because, well, they're moving back pretty far. They're giving up on their guy that they wanted to take at number 6. Your future picks, you got everything except your second, and you gave up Roy Robertson Harris. In the other scenario, the 3-way trade, you have everything except your third, and you still give up Roy Robertson Harris. So there's a difference of a second and a third round pick, and I think it could comfortably get the deal done. Now, could teams just say, oh, we want a first rounder if you're going to move up here no matter what? We're not budging. That's possible. I don't know how many teams are willing to make this move, though. That's kind of a big factor in it. So it's surely possible. I just think this is probably where I think the value would fall. But it's just something we're going to have to figure out in time. We'll see on draft night. Maybe Jacksonville does make a move like this. Maybe another team moves up around this range. I hope Jacksonville is the one who does it, of course. That's what I'm advocating for here. What I do think that getting creative with the way you're doing this, which has worked well for Jacksonville in the past, at least on paper, Like, well, the Calvin Ridley trade did not end well. That's more so an issue of how they dealt with it, right? I think the trade conditions were phenomenal because they protected themselves, but they literally worked their way into the worst case scenario. So, people trash the conditions. I don't think that was the problem. I think the problem was that they gave themselves no way to franchise tag Ridley, and they announced to the world, hey, we're not going to sign this guy until this specific hour on this specific date. That was the problem. You look at the Ezra Cleveland trade too, like when you get creative and you find a player that a team doesn't want, it's going to hit the market, and you offer them a late pick for him, now you got your future left guard, right? So there's moves they can make like that. Getting creative can be very beneficial for your team. So making a move like this, I'd be a huge fan of it. It's something I would absolutely be looking to do on draft day, and I think it would be the best move in the entire first round of the draft if I'm, giving my biased opinion. But yeah, those are my thoughts, guys. I don't got much else to give you other than that. We talked about Nabers before, but I wanted to give you really my thoughts on why I would take him as my first option on draft day, how I think that would get done, and what he would bring to Jacksonville. Like, I think if Jacksonville finds a way to get this deal done, whether it's the 6, whether it's the 8, whether somehow it's even later, we'll of course see what happens. But if they're able to get this done, I think that they have one of the best teams in the NFL. I think they have the potential to make a deep playoff run. And when you can make a deep playoff run, everything's on the table as far as the results. You could go all the way. You could also get knocked out in Arrowhead in the divisional round. Who knows, right? But I think they make it there. I think they win the division if they make a move like this. So you got to think about it. You got to find a way to maybe get something like this done, because the alternative, well, maybe it's 10 years of Malik Nabers in Tennessee. No one wants to see that, right? So just a thought, because that's the flip side of it. These teams have gone out of their way throughout our history to steal our guys, steal our draft picks, steal our free agents that we release, even the guys we target, right? Like, this has happened over and over and over. And if Jacksonville has a chance to take away a receiver that's going to be a potential Hall of Famer down the road, has that kind of talent for sure, but is going to be an elite wide receiver one at the next level, take that away for the next decade plus from your probably most hated division rival over the course of the franchise, how do you not think about that? That's what I'm going to leave you guys with. But I want to thank you all for watching. Give me your thoughts on what you do in the first round. There's a lot of different ways Jacksonville can come out on top, honestly. I could throw out other players. I could talk about Rome. I could talk even, about Olu Fashanu, for example. Not really one that a ton of people are huge fans of in Jacksonville, but there's so many ways they can go to win the first round of the draft. You just got to get a great player and hopefully a blue chip guy. But to me, this is the best case scenario. So thank you all for watching. Hope you have a great rest of your day. We'll have some more videos out here. I plan to have Mock Draft 6.0 tomorrow night, Wednesday night that is, and then Thursday we'll have my final thoughts before the 2024 NFL Draft and our live stream. So yeah, that's it. But yeah, we'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Thanks for joining. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.